What's going on, you weirdos? Hope you're doing well. I was thinking about this as I was editing last episode. Just like the odd demographic of who listens to this. And while I think it's like mainly male, I normally get a message or two from a girl. Tends to be when I talk about relationship stuff, I get those girl messages. But from the US to Poland to Czech to Finland to Portugal to... I get a random message from some Asian people out in Philippines and stuff like that. It's like, it's really cool. And I saw on, the Spotify Wrapped thing for 2021 that I was listened to in 24 different countries, which is wild to me. I probably can't even name 24 countries off the top of my head. I probably could. But I just want to say thanks. Getting back into this feels good. I'm having a lot more fun preparing, writing shit down throughout the week that I get on here and just spill the beans. Because as I said before, maybe the last few episodes before I left, I was sometimes just going off the top of the dome, which can be fun too because it's completely more free. But I was just talking to talk and saying things and posting it because I felt like I need to do it every single week. Not because I wanted to do it or I felt I had something to say. So I don't know, just starting it off in the therapy session. I just appreciate everybody. So thank you for tuning in. And welcome to Living for a Living with me, Joey Bradley.
Living for a living, baby. How you doing?
Yo, yo, yo. I forgot to say that, so let me get that yo, yo, yo in there before we start. This episode is brought to you by myself at Living for a Living. If you want to check out the website and support, that would mean a lot to me. www.livingforaliving.live. Shout out to my guy, Elliot, a.k.a. E-Rock. Made a purchase this last week, which was the first purchase in a while. Always feels good to see. I need to fill an order. And E-Rock has been one of my biggest supporters so far. Back in the States, Issaquah boy like myself, grew up walking to his house. He lived maybe like 5 minutes away from me. And his house was always the fun house to go to. Also the house that my mom never wanted me to go to because his dad would never be home, or his dad like always had to work. And so even sometimes when your kids, your mom drops you off or you go over there and the mom asks, are his parents home? Can I talk to his parents? And Paul, the dad, shout out Paul, he also listens to this too, which is kind of ironic now that I think about it, because back when we were kids, Paul wasn't there because of work and others. I don't know what, but I'm also very appreciative for that because we had a lot of fucking fun at your house, Paul. We got into some trouble, some probably that no one ever knows about, some that probably you do know about. But I'd be like, yeah, he's there. My mom would call, yeah, I'm here. And then we'd get there, and after like 30 minutes, Paul would go do something or go to work, I think. Paul, what the fuck did you do? I know you had a job that like you always kind of had to be on call or something. Maybe I'm making that up in my mind. But it's ironic now that you listen and pay attention to me right now. When we were kids, you weren't there. You weren't paying attention to me. That's okay. I take the attention now because I didn't want the attention then. And I got stories. I'm going to tell a couple stories, E-Rock, so hopefully you're cool with these. I think you'll get a laugh. These are some of my funny, like, childhood stories of being a shithead, basically. And it's a good lesson, I think, to see in the big picture because we turned out all right. And we turned into pretty respectable human beings, even though when we were kids... yeah, maybe we were doing some shit and getting in trouble and being a little bit of shitheads, like I said. But deep down, we were good people. And so, like, my favorite story, or one of them, I got a few. I don't know how long I'm going to tell all these, but the one that always sticks out in my mind is Elliot had a bit of a temper, you could say. And Elliot had an older brother named Matt, who was like 5 years older than us, I think. And Matt was like a true older brother that gave us shit, would threaten to beat us up when the threatening was needed. And so there was one time where Elliot and Matt had just gotten Diablo 2 for the computer. And Matt had been playing it all day, and Elliot really wanted to play it, but if Matt was going to play it, Elliot wasn't. So Matt finally went out to like shoot some hoops, and Elliot was pumped because, okay, now it's my time to play. I'm fucking finally going to play this game. But we made some lunch first, made some food, getting ready, or I don't know what exactly we made lunch. And in that little 30-minute window of making lunch, Matt had came back in from shooting hoops and got back on the computer. And as I mentioned before, Elliot had a bit of a temper. So we get back in and Elliot's pissed. Matt, I want to play. You've been playing all morning. Da-da-da. And Matt basically just says, like, tough shit, bro. I'm playing. Go fuck yourself. I don't know if those were the exact words, but more or less that was the theme of the conversation. And in Elliot's fit of rage, because he wanted to beat Matt up, but that was a losing battle every single time. He just had so much fucking anger in his body, and you could just see like steam coming out of his ears. There was a glass of apple juice on the table from the lunch that we had just made, and Elliot's like on the verge of like anger tears. Fuck you, Matt. I hate you. Da da da. And Matt like would totally egg it on. And so Elliot, the only way he could get this frustration out was he saw the glass of apple juice on the table and just, fuck you, Matt. Picks up the apple juice and just splashed it all against the wall. And it's so dumb. But it was so funny. And I'm sitting there, you know, it was hilarious. But at the same time, you don't want to laugh at your friend that's in an anger fit, basically. And Matt just looked at him and was like, you fucking idiot. And it was just so quick that we all just started laughing because we realized the absurdity of it. It was like, all right, well, now we need to clean up some apple juice against the wall. I mean, just full glass just running down the wall. So yeah, E-Rock, thank you. I appreciate that. But like I said, we were shitheads at times. I think I was a good kid at times, but like any kid, when there's an opportunity to get in a little trouble and have a little fun, we took it. You know, the time we probably got most in trouble, actually, or my mom got called. There were a few instances for that. But the main one, and this would not fly in 2021. We might get arrested and lose citizenship in the political correct culture that we did and that we're in now. You know, I feel really blessed because I got to grow up I was born in 1990, so I got to grow up before the internet where kids played outside and did stuff outside, but then at the end of the day, once everything you could do outside was done, we'd go in and play N64 or even Sega way back in the day. But then I also got to grow up in the internet world. You know, I can remember my dad first getting internet in his office, and so having to go down to his office to use the computer and use the internet. and being able to like download music and check sports scores. You didn't know what to fucking do on the internet when you first got it. You're like, what do I do? Yeah, downloaded music on Napster, LimeWire, Kazaa. And I had the original, or no, I didn't. I got an MP3 player the same time the original iPod came out. And my dumbass, I didn't want the iPod. I wanted this other thing. It was called the something jukebox. And it was a brick. I bet it had to weigh at least a pound or two. I mean, that thing you could throw through a window like a rock. Ironically, like the one that went through my van window. About the same size, actually. And putting music on that. And it's just crazy how much has changed. And that's less than 20 years ago. Where, just imagine, back then, you looked at an MP3 player, an iPod, or whatever, and thought, man, this thing is great. I can put any music I want on it. And I can play any music that I put on it. And then fast forward 20 years from then to now, and we look at iPods as completely obsolete because in the exact same sentence, it's like, I can only put and I can only listen to the music that I put on this. You know, in the world of streaming and Spotify is so great because you can listen to anything, anytime, anywhere. And so thinking that, I can only play music that I put on here, I'm so limited. Whereas 20 years ago, it felt like the possibilities were unlimited. So I go off on that tangent just to show the difference in the thought of culture in the world. And so we had some chalk. I think Ellen next door, who was like my first crush I ever had. Yeah, she had some chalk, and so maybe this is how our parents got called because Ellen's mom saw. Paul didn't see, that was for sure. And so we were playing outside with Ellen. Ellen was, drawing on the sidewalk. So we take some chalk, and man, this is gonna sound bad. It sounds bad thinking about it now. But there had been a Middle Eastern family that had just moved into the neighborhood, the street right across the street from Elliot. And this dude, I'm sure they were very nice people. We never really got to talk to them. But the one guy wore a turban, and this is right around 2001 with 9/11, Osama bin Laden times and all that stuff. And so we're drawing on the street. And I can't claim it was either Elliot and Grant was with us because Grant was like the nicest golden child kid there was. But deep down, those golden childs, they got something in them that it's like girls that go to Catholic school. They look all preppy and nice, and then those ones turn out to be the biggest sluts in the world because they've been having to hide any true emotions behind this facade of perfection. And so Grant was essentially the Catholic girl in our friends group. And so someone had the idea to write, Osama lives here. And it was just in the street. Damn, this is terrible. And I think maybe a little teeny arrow was drawn, but that was not good enough for old Grant. So he ends up making the arrow like 6 feet fucking big. So where Osama lives. And as I said, pretty sure Ellen's mom came out and saw that. And even in the slightly less political correct times in 2001, 2002, whenever the fuck this was, that still did not fly. And our parents got called for that one. think the other time my mom got called was there was this other neighborhood kid. It was great. Like, it was a true old school thing where a bunch of neighborhood kids, we'd come together, we'd meet at Elliot's house, we'd play capture the flag, we'd play ghost in the graveyard, we'd do bike races. You know, this was before cell phones, so it was like you're calling everyone's home lineup. I can still remember Josh Nyholt's home phone number because you just had to dial it so much. And it was like, yeah, hey, ghost in the graveyard at 8 p.m., be there. And just slowly, one by one, kids would show up from the few little neighborhoods around. So anyway, this one kid, Dylan Davidson, lived at the end of the street. And for whatever reason, we didn't really like Dylan. Super nice kid, I think, kind of a little weird. And, you know, as kids do, you kind of poke at the weirdness. And Dylan always wanted to hang out with us, but we didn't really want to hang out with Dylan. And so then there was this one time where Elliot, I think it was me, Elliot, and Ross, maybe? Sorry, Ross, I'm including you in this. And we were like, yeah, let's fuck with Dylan. We liked fucking with Dylan. And so we called him up and said, hey, Dylan, you know, we're playing, come on over. And that's just like, you know for sure he's coming because he wants to always hang out with us. So he like rides his bike down to Elliot's house or walks down. I don't even remember. And we had gotten a ton of rotten apples that had fallen right around in the neighborhood. And from Elliot's deck, we could see the street. And so we were all positioned in little different spots. And as Dylan rode up, we just murdered him in rotten apples. And then he ran home crying and told his mom. And, yeah, my mom got called for that one, too. You know, we just, like I said, that was, God, the good old days. I feel like I'm just getting so fucking old now. Even when I see 18-year-olds or 20-year-olds or whatever, and you can just see that, like, somewhat insecurity and a little bit of false confidence in a way that at the time you never had any clue about. And then I'm sure to those 20-year-olds, my 31-year-old ass kind of seems a little cynical and, you know, a little bit judgmental in a way, because that's probably how I looked at older people. You know, and it's like this false confidence you have. But those at 20 years old, those were good times. I mean, I'm not saying they're bad times now, but it just makes me think, as I've talked about this with friends, is over the last few years since I've been 29, around 30, I really don't like dating girls that are 24 to 26. Like, that age of just getting out of college is the worst girl to date, in my opinion. Over the last few years, I've either dated or kind of, you know, messed with girls that are either around my age or a little bit older, you know, 30 to 34-ish, or then the younger 20 to 24 range. But that in between, I just haven't really fucked with, because, and I know this for myself, speaking of my own experience, when you're in that like 24 to 26, 27-year-old range, you really think you got it figured out. And you think you know shit because you have a little bit of life experience. If you've just graduated college, like I mentioned before, those girls are the fucking worst because and probably guys too, to be honest, because you've just been given a piece of paper that tells you you're smart and you're ready for the world. And you've experienced this. And so, man, there's been a couple girls where it's just like, you can't tell them anything. You can't, it's not even like I'm trying to tell, you can't talk about anything. There's no conversation because they fucking know everything. And you're like, oh, okay, all right. You know, and at 18 to 20 to 22, you deep down know you don't know shit. But everyone's kind of pretending like they do a little bit. And then at around 30, you know again that you don't know shit, but you're much more open about it. At least I am, where I have no problem admitting like, hey, I don't really know what the fuck I'm talking about. I don't really know what the fuck I'm doing with this life. That's the other thing. As older you get and you meet more people that are quote unquote adults that have kids and have real jobs and careers and all that stuff. And you get to talking to them and seeing what they do and seeing how they live. And you're like, oh, nobody has any fucking clue what they're doing. We're all just pretending in a way. But that 24 to 27-year-old range, that's when you think you got shit figured out. From whether it be politics, life, goals, career, all that. You know. You just know. And man, that's that's like, I don't know where exactly I'm going from there. The last little Elliot Rocco story. Sorry to use your full name, Elliot, but that's okay. Like I said, we were shitheads. And one of our things we would do for fun, it would be nighttime after 10 p.m. And we had no goal. I don't know how it came about, just besides being kids that want to make life worse for everybody else. But we would go out into the middle of the street in the middle of the night. And for some reason, Elliot had like these metal rods in his garage, and he had the big water jugs like they would have at an office building, one of those water dispensers with the big, huge jugs. So we'd take those down into the middle of the street in the middle of the night and just slam them down in the street, just making as much noise as possible. And again, thinking back, I don't know what the goal was besides just making noise, waking people up. But that was something we did. Just something we did. And I wish more kids could get that experience. Because now I see kids, and I don't get to see a ton of them, but like my nephews, for example, there's no slamming metal rods and water bottles in the middle of the street nowadays. You got to play Fortnite. You got to play on the computer. Like that thing has taken over people's lives. And insequently, if I don't think that's a word, subsequently, kids are still being shitheads, but instead of slamming water bottles down and that kind, drawing Osama lives here and throwing rotten apples at kids, they're just being shitheads online and talking shit and telling people to kill themselves and bullying people online. Because, yeah, I guess us throwing apples at Dylan Davidson was definitely a form of bullying, I will say. But it was harmless. Yeah, he had to clean off some rotten apple off his shirt. And I wonder if he remembers that. But in comparison to ganging up with someone online and telling them, kill yourself, you're the worst, yada, 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 I think it was much less harmful. And it was way more fun. I don't get, as I've mentioned in the past, I do the whole TikTok thing with the podcast and mainly talk about Finnish things. But you just see through being on TikTok, when you look at comments sometimes, and it's just people, a majority of people on there don't even have their profile picture with them in it. It's like this anonymous account. And so they get to be this shithead behind a veil where no one really knows who it is. At least when we were shitheads, we owned up to it. And we admitted, yeah, we're being fucking shitheads. Come on. So I'm pushing for people to be shitheads non-anonymously. That's my new campaign. Oh, and last thing on that is, with all of that said, being shitheads. I know I've probably said that word way too many times already. You were allowed to make mistakes. You know, nowadays, if you fuck up once, you say the one wrong thing one time, people all jump down your throat, cancel this, shun, push you aside. But like with those three things that we did, two of them that my mom got called on, like, yeah, I got in trouble, but I was allowed to make that mistake. And it wasn't set in stone of the internet, because once something goes on the internet, for the most part, it's there. Yeah, you can delete it, but you can scroll back and look, oh, he said this, or oh, he did that, or whatever. It's in a way permanent. Whereas all those things were just going with the flow and eventually would kind of get forgotten about, although I didn't forget about them, as you can tell. And so that whole idea of not being able to make any mistakes and feeling like you need to be perfect in a way, I don't know. I'm no psychologist. I just don't think that's a good way for people to live, especially kids growing up. And yeah. So 20 minutes of stories later, I guess we can get into some of the therapy session stuff. You know, it was New Year's a couple weeks ago. I'm recording this on January 12th. Actually, hopefully posting this on January 12th. I'm not a big New Year's resolution guy, because I've always had the idea of, like, if you need a arbitrary date to change in order to change yourself, you're kind of fucking weak, is how my mind has realized it. And so I've never wanted to say, like, oh, I want to quit this or start doing that or do this or whatever, because it just seems like, well, if I really want to do it, I don't need to wait for it to go from December 31st to January 1st. But I've always, the last few years, I've kind of tried to adopt maybe a word or a theme to install into my life. And last year was consistency, and whether it be the podcast, whether it be working out, whether it be just doing things that I say that I enjoy doing, or not doing things I say I don't enjoy doing. I just wanted to be consistent in it. And for the most part, I did really, really well with that. I think I posted a podcast for pretty much dating back to what year is it? 2020. So dating back to 2020, there was a stretch where I think I went like 50 or 60 weeks in a row. I was much more consistent with the working out thing, because in the past I've always been able to work out well, especially in college. You're kind of forced to. But then even outside of that, I would work out, but then it's like I would go hard for a week or two or three. Or I'd go hard for 3 weeks, and then I'd just completely take a week off. Same thing with diet and eating well and those kind of things. And so last year I was much more consistent, and then, I hadn't thought about this actually until just now. Until the van stuff happened and I got onto that van life, I became incredibly inconsistent. And part of me wanted that, because I was starting to get a little bit bored with the consistency. But I think then also that inconsistency and lack of purpose bred some bad feelings inside of myself. So yeah, last year was consistency. This year, after experiencing that, and then also on the flip side, as I said, experiencing the inconsistency. And also last year, I think at times I just got away from myself. Here in Finland, people constantly say Finnish people hate small talk. And so when you go to the grocery store, when you see people in public, etc., don't ask them how you're doing, or don't ask them how they're doing. Just move on with the day. And I started doing that. But I've realized I like asking people how they're doing. And I like having those quote-unquote bullshit conversations throughout the day with random people and strangers and connecting in, they're somewhat irrelevant, but they also just make my day feel better. And I had realized last year when I was here, I was doing that. And also in Czech Republic, it wasn't I wasn't doing it very often for the most part because 50-50, especially at grocery stores, people didn't really speak English, so it was tough to do it. But here I stopped doing it because even though people speak really good English, it was just not part of the culture kind of thing. And so I just stopped doing it, and I could feel after being in Portugal and just randomly talking with people on the street, I was like, damn, that's me. I feel better about my day, myself. I think that they gain something from it. And so my theme for this year, I guess isn't really even a theme, but just kind of getting back to my true self and not allowing any outside influence, whether it be cultural, whatever the external factor may be, to affect me. And just truly being myself. And so now when I go to the grocery stores, when I'm going anywhere to check out, if I see someone on the street, hey, how's your day going? And as I said, people here aren't really used to that. And so sometimes it gets met with just like, well, I'm working. But other times, most of the time, I get the impression that people really enjoyed it. And that little bullshit 2-minute conversation, especially for a grocery store clerk who's kind of just monotonously doing the same thing over and over again, it brings a bit of difference into their day. Also, they got to speak English, talking to a weird motherfucker like myself. But it's like that little short 2 minutes can be a highlight of somebody's day if a day is really shitty. And then on the flip side, I really enjoy it. And it's fun for me. Say, how are you doing? Okay, yeah, I'm doing wonderful. And vibes and that type of stuff is contagious. So maybe my good vibe and my friendliness and happiness for that short little blip in time can then rub off on somebody else. Even if they only get it for 10 minutes, it's better than them not getting it for 10 minutes. And, that's something I'm starting to understand more and more. And as I reflect and have been reflecting on the past 3 months, and like I said, not being super stoked on the van life, even though in my mind that was like the goal, and that's something that would bring me happiness and I really wanted to do. And so then when it doesn't bring you happiness, it's almost like a double downer because you had this expectation and not only wasn't it met, but then you were wrong on top of it. And so I'm just starting to understand more and more that we all just want to feel like we have a purpose. Whether it be big or small, we just want something that we can identify with and feel like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be doing this. And there's a reason for me to be doing this. And again, as I continue to reflect on the last few months and the last year and last 5-6 years and places I've felt where I belong the most, that's the other thing that we all want is to belong. But then in times I've been the most happy, I've had this sense of purpose, this sense of like, oh yeah, this is truly what I'm supposed to be doing in this moment, in this time, in this place. And so that was part of the issue I'm understanding now is in Portugal in the van, wake up, and the goal for the day was just not die. You know, it was to drive 5 hours. It was to get ice for the cooler. It was to go grocery shopping, to find a parking spot. And honestly, that wasn't, I felt like my purpose was a little bit more than that. And that idea has made me realize a lot more too that, you know, it's a big reason why people have kids. And I myself, I've never exactly seen myself having kids. Well, I guess I see myself having kids. As I've said before, it's just been a tough combination of if I'm going to have kids, I need to get a wife. And if it's tough right now in the way my lifestyle is in order to think I'm going to get to see a long-term type of relationship like that. But here, being around Vilma has 2 kids. And so I get that experience, albeit in handfuls, but it's pretty fun. And so by no means am I like trying to do that now. I just understand and can relate a lot more with people who have kids and say, oh, it's the greatest joy in the world. And it's, you know, it gives me this new purpose in life. You know, I've heard friends who have kids say that kind of stuff. And I've always been like, yeah, okay, but fucking idiot. You know, like that's how I've always interpreted it. But with that responsibility also then comes some things that you give up and some freedom you give up. And I think that's also why in my mind, kids just don't equate into my plan, because I still have quite a few things that I'd like to do. And I've always said that if I do have kids, I want to be there 24/7 nonstop. Maybe not 24/7, but you know what I mean? Like if I'm going to do it, I really want to fucking do it. All or nothing type of shit. And I was fortunate growing up, you know, I think we all look at parenthood or childhood, however you want to say it, and relate it and compare it to the childhood that you had. And I think I had a great childhood. My parents were both great. My mom was literally, she was there a little bit too much probably. Love you, Mom. No, I'm joking. But even though I say that, that's what, because knowing how I've turned out to make this narcissistic, I would want that same thing for my kids. And so the same way that my parents brought me up, and obviously change a little bit here and there, but just the fact of being there was so influential for me and how I perceive it now as an adult. That's what I would want to emulate as a parent myself. Where am I going now? I guess to finish off on that little tangent of purpose and those kind of things, that's something now that I'm back in Finland. It's weird that as soon as I got back, recording the podcast, editing, going to practice, I've still been a little bit lazy getting into the gym, kind of getting that little wheel turning, but it's going to happen. I'm not going to kick myself over it. It just feels again like I have a purpose, or in another sense, like I belong. And I didn't think I would feel that so much, because I didn't feel this purpose and belonging when I had left. But again, then getting that opposite experience and that opposite extreme kind of just, again, gives you the perspective. And, when I was in Portugal, being back there, which is a place when I was living there, I truly felt, oh, I belong here. I have this purpose here. But then 5 years later, 6 years later, and being back, I felt, fuck, I don't feel that anymore. And that was kind of a bummer. But it just plays into this whole thing, change is the only constant. And so if I would have felt exactly the same as I did 5 years ago in the same place, that would probably be more worrisome than the reality of not feeling like I have purpose and belonging there. You know what I mean? Even though that's kind of what I wanted, as I look back on it now, kind of zoom out away from it, that would be actually probably worse if I felt like, oh yeah, it's the exact same as it was before. Because that means either I'm not growing or changing and people there aren't growing and changing. Yeah. All right, moving on. Completely change of topic here. I watched a movie on Netflix the other night called Mother Android. And it was actually a really good movie. I'd recommend watching it. But it might also be a future documentary similar to Black Mirror. Because Black Mirror episodes are scarily, frighteningly becoming true one day at a time. That social credit score one is one of my favorite episodes, and that is, I think we're 3 or 4 years away from that being reality. But this movie, Mother Android, to give you a brief synopsis, it's in the future, I don't know exactly how far, where every household kind of has a robotic butler, and at a certain point, the robots take over. And so then it goes through that whole scenario. And I gotta say, I think they're prepping us for the robot takeover. And it's been much more prevalent in the last year or two. I know there's been movies like iRobot in the past and Wall-E and shit like that in the past. But now, maybe it's because it's in my mind, so then I'm finding it and seeing it in my own life. But I think we're destined for that to happen. Between movies like this, and then when I'll be on TikTok nowadays, I don't know if anyone else is on TikTok, you'll scroll through and see videos. I don't even know what the page is, but it's a very realistic looking robots that are talking and answering questions with people at like a convention kind of thing. And they're asking them certain questions and yada, yada. I mean, we already have Alexa and Siri and all these things in our lives already. But then also on TikTok Live, almost once a week, I see at least scroll through and there'll be a guy with, again, like a very realistic robot, a human robot behind him. And he's kind of asking it questions, and people in the chat are asking it questions and all these things. And to me, it's just this normalization that's desensitizing us to the possibility of robots in the future. And I think, honestly, that's a big reason why this mask thing has been pushed so hard, to get a little conspiratorial, is because the hardest thing, I think, for a robot to feel real will be those smile and the mouth expressions. It's like they can do eyes but like to get the mouth to work the right way, to smile, to frown, there's so much emotion in the mouth. That's probably the heart. And this is all just I have no information or research behind this. This is just my thinking. It's so hard to make that seem real. And even on these robots that you see in TikTok, that's the one part that kind of like makes you realize like, yeah, it's still a robot. And so I could see in the future, if they can continue this insanity with all mask wearing constantly, and there's places and surveys being done where people want to wear the masks forever. And it's probably going to happen. But then if you then had a robot who's wearing a mask to feel human, that would limit and make it so much easier for it to feel real and feel human. And again, on this conspiratorial thought and idea is with, I've said this before, I don't know on my podcast, but maybe on someone else's podcast, is I don't know if this whole thing is an effort for depopulation. There's some weird stats that obviously don't get talked about, that whether it be with women's menstrual cycles and stuff like that being affected by what's going on, in addition to a lot of sperm banks now aren't accepting people who have been vaccinated sperm because of fertility issues, and that was one of the, and I'm probably biased a little bit in this thinking because early on in the pandemic 2 years ago, when I was still in Spain, my ex there was working at a restaurant during one of the breaks in lockdown, and one of her friends or a doctor, someone she knew that was a doctor there, literally told her to her face, like, if you want kids, don't get it. Because she was like, I'm not saying that it will for sure happen, but they're not telling us as doctors what the fertility issues are. And that's not conspiratorial at all, because that's, I think, on the box. I've seen articles where they actually talk about, the fertility effects are unknown. And so anyway, if all of this effort, and I don't fucking know, man. Like I said, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. If the effort is somewhat of a depopulation, because my thinking behind it is, if we start implementing robots more and more into the lower class type of jobs, I mean, you go in McDonald's nowadays, you don't have to talk to someone. You can just order there, which actually I kind of like in a way. But you go to Walmart, you go to certain stores, and you fucking work there. They don't have a cashier. So even if it's not a true robot replacing someone, but in certain instances it will, like I think of an information kiosk or something like that. You could have a robot there that would know everything, and that gets rid of a job. And examples like that just slowly eat away at lower tier, lower class labor type of jobs that people have. That's what makes sense in my mind for then why a depopulation tactic or agenda might be useful, because then it's gonna make a lot of people obsolete who were in these jobs and now don't have jobs. And so then the only thing that those people, lower class citizens, I don't mean that disrespectfully at all, it's just the way of explaining it. The only thing that they can do then is create problems. And we see it now going on. If all of those people would rise up and come together, we could stop a lot of the bullshit that's going on. Like, that's kind of what's happening in England right now. I just talked to a British friend who said, basically every England is like wide open and no one really gives a fuck right now, because everyone just kind of said, fuck the rules, we're not going to go by them, and did it. I don't know if it was organized, but just started doing it. And then the government was like, well, okay, we won't have that anymore then. This idea that complying into normalcy is the right way to do it is absolutely absurd in my mind. And I think historically shows that never works. And so anyway, back to the whole point of, if robots start taking these lower tier jobs, all that the lower tier people then who are ousted from them can do is create problems, it would then make sense. You'd want to limit the amount of people that are in that lower tier job. And then a way to limit it, there's multiple ways. So I'm not saying that's what's going on, but that's just an idea that I've had regarding what's happening and how I could see those narratives being put into place and why they would. You know, it's I think different when someone will say, "Oh yeah, it's a depopulation thing and the government wants to kill everybody and da 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 da." And because a lot of people will say that, but if you don't have actually a reasoning for why, or an idea for that next step of why or how or anything like that, then that's when it just becomes, and maybe actually me saying all that stuff is even more conspiratorial than those other people, because I'm like truly thinking there's a plan. I guess that is somewhat the definition of conspiracy. But by bringing all those things up, I think there's actually reasoning to my thinking. Whether it's right, I don't know. But that's just, again, the logic of my mind. Moving on. I think somebody's got to say this. I hate to be the one, but I don't mind being it. And I have to preface all of this by saying, like, because what I'm going to say is a little fucked up, I think. Welcome to the show. I fully understand and think like this whole, the trans movement, I'm in support of it. I think while I don't understand it, just because I don't understand it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And I can understand that in a very small percentage, people feel like they've been born into the wrong body and with the wrong sex and that kind of thing. Same thing with, 10, 20 years ago, it was gay. And again, fully in support of that. Have gay friends that there's no question in my mind about that kind of stuff. Now, I will say, in terms of the gay thing, there are some girls who are claiming to be gay that are not gay, or claiming to be then bisexual. And I have I'm speaking from previous experience, is I have a friend who I've known very, very well throughout my life, who we've hooked up, and we've talked about her relationships throughout her entire life, and which have always been with guys. And there's never been an inkling talking about thinking girls are attractive or wanting to be with a girl from 12 years old to 25 or 26 years old. And then at 26, she ended up dating this girl for a year or two. And in that time said, like, I'm gay. And in my mind, I'm thinking, like, no, bitch, you're bi. If you're gay, if you do like girls, I know you still like guys. But was, fully enveloped. Man, I gotta start working on my words, man. Fully engulfed in the rainbow flag kind of stuff, which again, I have zero problem with at all. But it was just in this scenario, in this situation, I was like, that's not true. You're just going with it. I don't know why exactly. You've dated some shitty dudes, and so you want to experience something else, which is fucking cool. Go for it. But then to like fly the almighty flag of this is who I am, I didn't believe it. I should say I don't want to judge it in any way, shape, or form, but I didn't believe it. And then after a certain amount of time, I find out through friends of friends and shit that, well, I I guess I don't want to put all her business out, even though she doesn't listen or care. But ultimately, she's back to dating a guy now. After, I think, cheating on the girlfriend with the guy. And so it was just like this moment in my mind where I was like, I fucking knew it. And so, I don't know where I started this or how I got onto that part, but the thing I was trying to get into is, even though I fully think the trans gay stuff is out there, legitimate, even though some people, this is how I was trying to relate it, even though some people are doing it in a way of like attention seeking, you know? Because to me, again, not saying I'm right, this is just my thinking. If I was trans and I truly felt like I was a girl and I wanted to be a girl, and that's how I identified, that's how I felt, that's how I saw myself, that's how I wanted everyone else to see me, I would want to then go through the process to make the change. But once I'd made the change, I wouldn't want to fucking talk about it. I wouldn't want people to see me as that. I would want to just live and be who I am as a girl. I wouldn't want to constantly be calling attention to myself in hopes, because all that is then doing is putting me in the spotlight for something I just truly feel of who I am. And so that's some of the issues I have with it, I guess. And I don't even want to say issues, but some things that like put a little, get my antennas up and make me think. But the whole reason I bring all this up is to say that the non-binary thing to me makes absolutely no sense. And to me, the non-binary thing is solely an attention-seeking thing. To say that you're neither, to me, it just like and I don't know if I have any friends that identify as non-binary. So all I see then is people on the internet who do it. And for whatever reason right now, there's a huge theme of like teachers talking on social media that are explaining, yeah, I'm non-binary and my kids in preschool and kindergarten don't understand it, but I'm trying to teach them, which is fucking scary in itself. The indoctrination worries me a little bit. Rewind back to being a kid at my time of life. My time in history was a lot better and a lot easier. I couldn't imagine Mrs. Vanderholt telling me she's some days a guy and some days a girl. I don't know how I would react to that at 7 years old. That would probably fuck me up. And so anyway, I don't have a lot of real world experience with it. So part of me doesn't want to talk on it, but at the same time, I just want to get my ideas out. Where to me, the non-binary thing is essentially like the goth of the 90s and the 2000s. It's feeling misunderstood. It's feeling like you don't belong. Rewind back to everyone just wants to feel like they belong. And so it's this way of putting yourself in a group that isn't a group. You know, when I was in 6th grade, 7th grade, this girl broke up with me. Alana broke up with me, and I really liked Alana. And I was fucking sad and depressed. And so there was maybe a week or two. I was also listening to a lot of My Chemical Romance at the time. Where there was a week or two where I would only wear black, had the thumb holes cut out of the sweatshirt, Sharpied my nails black. I think I used to write like Roman numerals in Sharpie on my knuckles. I don't know. That was my way of... But I'm saying I was kind of in this little like goth, depressed phase, feeling bad for myself, not wanting to talk about it, but wanting people to know about it. And it took my dad's old school guy. We're at the dinner table one day I got my painted nails, and he's like, Joe, you look like a fucking kook. Take that shit off. And in the moment, I didn't really appreciate that. But looking back now, I'm so thankful he did that, because he was right. That like wasn't who I was. That was just like this little phase. And that's what I kind of compare this like non-binary thing to. But it's worse in a way, because then with the social media and being able to express yourself that way and just express yourself essentially to no one, but at the same time everyone, it just allows it to snowball and compound and further expand. Those are 3 synonyms right there for the same thing. And so that's what I feel those two things are super comparable nowadays. The funny thing too with me, again, just seeing it on social media with the non-binary people, it seems like in that case, in the terms of gender and sex, they view things non-binary, that it's fluid and very, very open and everything else. But ironically, everything else that they speak on and believe is incredibly binary. It's either this or that. And if you don't accept and you don't fit into it, then you hate everybody. And, it's just, that's also kind of the times we're in with the whole like liberal mindset, or I should say the social media liberal mindset of like, well, if you want strong borders, it means you hate all immigrants. And if you want there to be choice for vaccination, it means you want people to die. Like these if and then statements, these binary statements, because it's so, the whole idea with COVID right now of the treatment being you either get vaccinated and you're safe, or you don't and you're not safe. And it's like, well, there's this like middle ground of how about like treatment and preventative treatment and diet and exercise and taking care of yourself. No. It's either this or it's that. And that's what it is. And that is science, and you can't argue with that. And I know someone's going to disagree with that idea and statement, which is okay, because 1, you're allowed to do it, and 2, nowadays people will disagree with anything that's ever said on the internet. You could say that I want peace and love for all over the world and everyone to be happy and there to be no starving children, and someone would get in the comments and say, well, what about the bad people? They should be unhappy. They should starve. There will be someone that wants to disagree with literally anything anyone says on the internet. Whether it's true or it's just someone being a fucking troll with an anonymous account, there's always going to be someone that disagrees with something. And I experienced this on a much smaller level with the last TikTok post I did, talking about how it's nice to be back in Finland because there's this sense of security and safety that doesn't exist in every other part of the world. And people comment, well, that's not how it is in the cities. And that's changing now. It used to be better. And no, you're wrong. And like people almost getting not upset or mad, but yeah, in a way like mad that I'm saying this place is a safe place and it's a good place to live. Now, well, it's not that good. But then on the flip side, if I'll say some shit about the culture being different than I experienced or than I'm used to, someone then will also get in and say, well, you're wrong. That's what's good about here. And just because it's like that here doesn't mean that this is a good thing here. It's like, I'm not saying, okay. Like basically just people will always disagree with anything that gets put on the internet for the most part. But that's also a good thing. As I've realized slowly getting into this social media kind of podcast world, is if everyone's agreeing with you, you're never going to get big. And so being polar, while I don't like how the news do it, because the news do it in such an agenda-based way and are really trying to manipulate how people are thinking. But in a situation like myself, or I'm not putting myself into Rogan's category at all, but like Rogan, I can say we're similar in the sense where I'm just saying what's on my fucking mind. I'm not saying I'm right. I'd love to learn. I'd love to be wrong and change my opinion. But I'm just saying how I'm being. I'm trying to be as true to myself as I can. And in that way, and not being scared about what I say. But in that way, then, if some of those ideas are polar, it really elevates you and makes you more popular. You know, the reason I got little popularity on Finnish TikTok out here isn't because I'm saying, oh, it's so perfect here. And I just love it. And everything's perfect. And this is so much better than the US and yada, yada, yada. It's because I'm saying what's truly on my mind and the differences that I see. And ironically, as I mentioned, on both sides, people are going to disagree. If I say this is a great place because it's safe, someone's going to say, no, I'm wrong because it's not that safe and compared to how it used to be. And if I say, oh, the dating culture is kind of a certain way and I'm not used to that here, they'll say, oh, well, fuck you. Just you think all the girls are sluts or all you know, whatever gets said. It's just interesting. But ultimately being polar is the way to go. And I never, that's a struggle, I think, once you get into this podcast, social media type of thing, is you want to remain polar, but you don't want to try to be polar. Because then if you're trying to be polar, you're no different than the mainstream media at all. Ooh, and that's a perfect segue. Speaking of the mainstream media, you know, there's this last week, most people probably haven't seen. I've only seen it on Twitter. Granted, I don't watch the news and I don't go to CNN.com. Although there's some funny things to talk about CNN coming up. There's been some issues in Kazakstan right now. You know, there's also the issue, Russia has some shit boiling in the pot right now, whether it be Kazakhstan, whether it be Ukraine. But if you haven't heard, Kazakhstan essentially overthrew the government. The internet went down there for a couple days. I don't know if it's still down. I haven't fully stayed up to date on it. But from what I know, what I know is the Kazakhstan government, which the president there is essentially just a hand-selected person from the dictatorship before it. Some of my wording might be wrong here. And so it wasn't like he was voted in. And so a lot of people have had problems with him leading up to this point. But they made something in regards to you needed a Vax pass in order to access your bank account, which a lot of people didn't like, I'm sure. And so that in addition to other issues has led to a massive uprising, burning down buildings, the president and prime minister fleeing the country. All of this stuff happening, which I've only seen a little bit on Twitter here and there. But those type of things aren't what mainstream media wants to talk about. You know, whether it be stuff that's happened in Venezuela, whether it be stuff Kazakhstan, whether it be some of the massive protests that have taken place for months on end throughout Europe and Australia in regards to green passes and lockdowns and stuff like that. You never see that stuff on mainstream media because that doesn't fit the narrative and that doesn't fit the agenda. That, in fact, goes absolutely against the agenda. That, if everyone comes together and rises up, some change can be made, whether it be good or bad change. That idea that coming together can equal change is not an idea that the mainstream media wants to push, because that gets some scary thoughts going for some people. And it's the same thing with, I'm pretty sure now, the Ghislaine Maxwell trial is over. And boy, that was about the most quiet trial you'd ever seen for it being arguably one of the biggest child sex trafficking cases in the history of the world. And you compare it with the Rittenhouse case, which took place a month before or whatever, where they had that case and that trial on TV and videos constantly on repeat with Kyle Rittenhouse saying this, crying here, doing that. With the Maxwell case, and the Rittenhouse thing is literally only 2 people died or 3 people died. And I don't want to say that in light, only 3 people. But in comparison to a child sex trafficking ring that who knows how many people's lives have been ruined, that's been going on for 20 to 30 years. In comparison that way, only 2 or 3 people dying and arguably it being in self-defense. I'm not going to get into it. It is what it is. I don't think Rittenhouse is a hero, and I don't think he's the devil either. But that case was on nonstop. And then Maxwell, all you would get from the Maxwell trial is maybe a picture a day, a hand-drawn painting. And that just like slowly faded out. But again, if there's a lot of people in power that could be implicated for it, money talks, my friends. Money talks. All right, as always, I got a little bit of COVID insanity to talk about, so if you don't want to hear that, I try and always save that to the end. Appreciate you listening. Until next time, peace and much love, but I'm going to get into that COVID insanity, which is, I got to admit, I'm a little bit surprised with Finland right now, because up until this point for the last 2 years, I have felt that Finland has been one of the most rational yet cautious countries in the world in regards to how they've handled things over the last 2 years. But as it appears that this whole thing is kind of coming to an end, with Omicron being incredibly mild and other countries that have been insanely crazy, like Portugal, getting ready to open everything up and limiting all restrictions. Like when I was in Portugal, the amount of fear felt from the populace was higher than anywhere else I've been in the world. And yet here they are saying no more restrictions as of next week because of what's gone on with Omicron and that kind of stuff. And so it's a little interesting to me now. Maybe Finland in their rational ways for the last 2 years is like, shit, we got to get a little crazy while there's still time to get crazy. Because right now, shit does not make any sense here in Finland. And that just goes into the whole narrative of the last 2 years, where up until this point, I couldn't really say that about things here. Because even though there's at times like, maybe it shouldn't be that way, it's been pretty rational. But now, right now here in Helsinki and stuff, like gyms are all closed, bars are all closed, they have been closed. And I don't know, I think rules vary region by region, so I only really know what's happening here in Kuopio. But I went out to lunch on Friday, last week. But I went out to lunch last week to the Thai restaurant that I always would go to. So I know the guy who works there really well. We always have a nice conversation. And I was talking to him, and he was like, dude, this shit makes no sense right now. And I was like, well, welcome to the club. And it's ironic to me to see Finnish people now like saying, oh, none of this makes sense, blah, blah, blah. The government. I kind of chuckle in a way, not because of how they're feeling, but just because they're now experiencing what pretty much everywhere in the world has experienced at some point in the last 2 years. And so then to just see it, I never thought it would come to this point here, but to see people's minds, like, it just doesn't make sense and I just don't get it, blah, blah. It's almost comical to me because there's always been a little bit of a smugness I've felt from Finnish people in regards to what's going on. Like, well, our government really knows what it's doing and we trust our government because da, 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 da. And then for this thing to come out and it's like, oh, you're not bulletproof, my friends. You're not bulletproof. And so anyway, I'm talking to the dude who works at the Thai restaurant and he's like, man, tell me how this makes sense. He goes, so the rules now are bars have to close before 5 p.m., but most of them just aren't even opening because no one drinks before 5 p.m. besides the professionals. But restaurants can be open until 8 p.m. The only thing is, if you're open until 8, you have to check for the Vax Pass all day. But if you close at 6, you don't have to check for the Vax Pass all day. And the way he explained it to me, I thought he meant like, okay, after 6 p.m. you have to check for the Vax Pass. So I confirmed that, and he goes, no. He goes, so get this. He goes, on Monday through Thursday, we close at 6, so I don't have to check. But on Friday and Saturday, we close at 8, so I have to check all day. So if you come here Thursday at noon, I don't check you. But if you come here Friday at noon, I do check you. And I was like, I got to admit, that one takes the cake. That one's almost on the same level as like having to wear a mask when you walk into the restaurant and then being able to take it off as soon as you sit down. But not surprisingly, local elections are coming up soon here in Finland. And so normally around election time, anywhere in the world, people get a little bit crazy and things get a little bit extreme because politics is the big facade of caring about the people. And what better way, if you're running for a political position, to say, I care more than the other guy, is we need to put some more rules in place because I'm doing it because I care about you. And then on the flip side, it makes it really hard for the other side to go against it because they can use the narrative of, well, they don't care about you. Back to the binary thing. They don't care if you die. They want you to die. And so even a place like Finland, that's incredibly rational in my opinion, can still succumb to some of these political prowess measures that are used and turn the whole COVID situation into a politicized thing. And so what's being suggested now, which again makes no sense, I think the health minister and the health, again, I'm hearing all of this from a friend, so I'm only getting from what he's saying. But there's a health minister and like a health department, and they're both disagreeing. And the minister is saying that schools should go back to online. And obviously people don't want that. And so there was a big fuss made to keep kids in school because there's been no statistics proven that schools and kids are transmitting this thing more. But in order to keep schools open, families need to test kids 2 to 5 times a week at home. And that's something like 2 million tests, a little bit more, per week that would need to be used at home. And the idea of testing asymptomatic people and on top of that, asymptomatic kids is absolutely insane. Thinking back to how when you're a child and the things that happen in childhood that you can't really process and you don't really have the maturity and intellect to fully process and understand the traumas that get created and how then they impact you later on in life, that just seems like a recipe for disaster to me. To constantly be testing kids that feel, kids and adult, but kids that feel good and are healthy, to test them for a sickness is literally a sickness in itself, or creating a mental sickness. And then meanwhile, like I said, in places like Portugal, which has been absolutely crazy with some of this stuff, is fully opening everything up. And then even CNN itself now, which knows that their little charade is slowly crumbling as stats are starting to come out more and more and more. So they kind of need to get in line a little bit, saying, isn't it kind of weird that isn't that a little misleading? Like I have this clip right here.
So the hospitals are still stretched thin because of this, so I'm not trying to take away from that. But if 40% in some hospitals, 40% of the people who have COVID don't necessarily have problematic COVID. They're there because they got in a car accident. They're there because
right.
They bumped their head, and they're being included as in the hospital with COVID. That number seems kind of misleading.
Yeah, I agree, Jake. It surprises me that they have not been able to parse out that data more carefully. I think the data that Dr. Walensky is quoting is from New York State, and we've been following that data as well. And I can show you what we've seen, sort of tracks with what she said. But out of all the patients that are in the hospital, about 57%, these are COVID patients, admitted because of or complications from COVID, 43% admitted for other reasons and then diagnosed with COVID. I think, there needs to be transparency about that in terms of for or with COVID.
Which was literally a conspiracy theory said by Joe Rogan and Elon Musk and people who have been outspokenly questioning everything. It's now all being backed up. This is just the next conspiracy theory that's coming true. A year ago, it was a conspiracy theory to say that the virus came from a lab leak, which I guess Fauci soon is going to be under oath to talk about and admit something in regards to that. But that now is pretty much the accepted idea. The idea that vax passes will exclude you from society. The fact that it'll only be 2 shots. Again, I just saw another clip of the Pfizer CEO coming out and saying that the 2 shots went for first when they came out, they were 100% effective. And now he's saying they provide very little protection, if any. And then that the booster provides reasonable protection, something like that. I'll just play the clip. And so all these things are just like slowly coming out. And for me, I'm more hopeful now than I ever have been over the last 2 years. Because it feels like a majority of the people, one, are starting to see through this stuff. And then if organizations like CNN are even openly questioning these type of things, it's a good start. And then on the flip side, people are just getting sick and tired of going through this lockdown bullshit cycle that we've been on for the last 2 years. But it's not all hopeful rainbows and sunshine, as there's places, France, Germany, Austria, Australia, where it appears the governments there are doubling down even more so on some of the insanity. There's something French Prime Minister made a comment about the unvaccinated or non-citizens, something to those degree. People all over have said that. And again, to me, it's ironic because it seems like places that have had a history of dictatorship, a recent history of dictatorship and authoritarianism, tend to fall back into that trap much, much easier than places where that hasn't existed. You know, when you compare the recent histories of a Germany, Austria versus a Finland and Sweden, it's a little bit different in terms of freedom and authoritarianism and how that thing's gone. And you would think we would learn from history, and you would think that German police going around and checking people's papers would set off a little red light in some people's heads. But it doesn't. I've talked about it before, but there's a book that is one of my favorite books called Humans, A Brief History of How We Fucked It All Up. And if that book taught me anything, it's that we don't learn from history. Maybe we only remember 5 years or 10-year periods at a time, but once it gets outside of that time frame, it seems like we either become arrogant and think it could never happen to us again, or we just forget, and it's ignorance. I'm not sure what it is in this case. I would venture to believe it's more ignorance than arrogance, but who knows? Ultimately, man, we should be celebrating this Omicron variant. And again, as I said last episode, I'm like 95% sure that I had it a couple weeks ago. My taste now is like slowly coming back. I had some blueberries yesterday that were fucking fire, and being able to taste them was a big win. But we should be celebrating this, because if the pandemic's going to end, if the quote-unquote pandemic is going to end, it's not going to be through It's not going to be through 12 booster shots. It's going to be through everyone getting it and then developing immunity. It's like the chicken pox. Although I never got the chicken pox. Motherfucking chicken pox. What is being made into fear with all the cases are surging and we can't control it. Meanwhile, there's only 63 people in critical condition in all of Finland for COVID. We should be celebrating that. Deaths are down. If cases are rising and deaths are down, that's a really good thing. Because that means it's not severe. And it's just kind of like a common cold or flu. Which again, I think everyone had forgotten. 5 years ago, think about when you got a really bad thing of the flu. You thought you were going to die. But the idea that the pandemic is going to end with 100% vaccination rate is pretty much proven to be bullshit now at this point. When you see certain countries like Israel and Northern Ireland, which the vaccination rate is incredibly high, or you see organizations like the NHL, NBA, NFL, which NHL has a 100% vaccination rate, and then they've had to pause the season at a certain point over COVID outbreaks. And so when you see stuff like that, and then again, you have the Pfizer CEO saying that it doesn't really do much. Again, just how my brain works, that's not how it'll end. So I think that's all I got for today. Appreciate your time. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you have a wonderful day. And until next time, peace and much love. Holla.